The air smelled like autumn, dry wheat, wood smoke, damp boots. The harvest had been good, the barns were full. But the soldiers came anyway. They weren't loud, they didn't need to be. They had clipboards, rifles, and red bands around their arms. They called it a collection, as if they were gathering donations. Grain, livestock, tools, even seeds for next year. All taken. By sunset, even the family icons had been packed away in crates. There was no explanation. Just a truck, idling, waiting. No one dared speak. In your village, it started with the removal of bread. Not just loaves, the idea of bread. The smell of it, the memory of it. People whispered about hiding food, but the whispers didn't last long. The Soviet decree was clear. Failure to surrender grain was sabotage, and sabotage was treason. The law of 5 ears, they called it. Anyone caught with even 5 stalks of wheat in their pocket could be shot. And were. At first, you thought it was a misunderstanding, a few weeks of hunger. Then the trains would return. Then the rations would resume. But the trains didn't come, and the only things that returned were rumors. Rumors that the cities had food, that other villages were worse off, that cannibalism had begun along the Dnieper. No one believed it, until the first child went missing. And then, everyone believed everything. You tried to help, tried to boil bark, to dry moss into powder. Some tried to roast shoe leather. One man ground up grass and mixed it with water to make a paste that choked children when swallowed. No one told him to stop. At least he was trying. The famine wasn't just hunger. It was a ritual, a dismantling, a ceremony of subtraction. People stopped making eye contact. Laughter vanished. Church bells rusted silent. You watched a man dig a pit to bury his wife. Then, 3 days later, dig it back up. He didn't cry. No one judged him. Judgment had no place here. Only survival. The Soviet records from that winter mention excess mortality due to administrative failures. But the diaries, the ones hidden in attics, sewn into coats, smuggled west decades later, say something else. This wasn't a failure. It was a weapon. Grain exports to Europe didn't stop. Soviet quotas increased. Ukrainian borders were sealed. Armed guards were stationed at rail stations to prevent peasants from fleeing to the cities. Food aid was denied to entire provinces. Anyone who attempted to leave was labeled a traitor. If caught, they were returned. Not to their homes, but to die, publicly, as examples. You remember a neighbor, old, silent, always carved spoons from birch. He refused to surrender the last of his rye. They made an example of him, tied him to a post, left him there for 3 days. He didn't scream. He just faded. His eyes were still open when the crows came. The children were the first to stop moving. Their faces ballooned. Bellies swelled. They didn't cry. Just stared, dull-eyed, like old men in small bodies. The mothers stopped trying to explain why there was no milk. Words were more exhausting than hunger. People began to forget dates, then names, then their own voices. But they remembered the sounds, the echo of boots on frozen dirt, the cough of someone who wouldn't wake up, the crunch of frostbitten fingers snapping off a corpse when lifted too quickly. These were the only clocks left. A woman you once knew, a singer before the war, stopped speaking entirely. She hummed instead. One note, over and over, until she collapsed into the snow, still humming. Someone buried her with a spoon and half a button. Later, the authorities claimed they had no idea, that the famine was natural, that the climate had shifted. But maps discovered after the fall of the Soviet Union showed something else. Villages were marked with red X's, not for evacuation, for extinction. And still, some historians debate the cause. Some say Holodomor was economic mismanagement. Others, genocide. Intentional or not, does it matter when your ribs pierce your skin and your child asks if grass counts as dinner? That night, you lay down beside your sister. Her breath was shallow. Her hand, bird-like, curled against your shoulder. She whispered something, maybe a memory, maybe nothing. You didn't respond, because speaking meant losing the strength to listen, and listening meant hearing the hunger call your name again. The earth stopped giving, so people started taking from whatever still moved. At first, it was instinct. A frog near the well, a rat beneath the barn. Someone caught a snake, boiled it to mush, and passed the broth to a neighbor's child. No one questioned where it came from. Meat was no longer meat. It was heat. Soon, the fields were stripped of grass. Bark disappeared from trees. People clawed at roots with bare hands, hoping to find insects, grubs, beetles, worms the size of fingers. Once, you saw a man eat a centipede alive. He didn't flinch when it bit him. He just chewed faster. They said that in some places, boiling scorpions made you hallucinate less than starving. Your grandmother once told you never to eat anything with more than 4 legs. She died with a cricket leg still stuck between her teeth. The Soviet guards didn't care. If anything, they watched. Not with amusement, with calculation. They knew what came next. Every animal gone. Every plant devoured. What's left? People. But that part hasn't happened here. Not yet. Or maybe it has, and no one's speaking. You see a woman digging in the frost. She unearths something, wraps it in cloth, carries it home like treasure. The smell comes later. It's not meat. It's memory burning. Villagers used to fear wolves. Now they wish wolves would come. At least it would mean something still had flesh. But even the predators are gone. Only the crows remain. They don't bother to fly off anymore. They know you're not a threat, just a shadow waiting for gravity to win. In March 1933, the Soviets tightened movement controls. Those caught fleeing to the city were dragged back, accused of betrayal. Stealing Soviet resources with your hunger, one officer reportedly said. As if appetite were theft. One man was sentenced for baking bread in secret. His flour came from ground cattail root and wallpaper glue. His sentence, public shame and death. His final words weren't recorded, just the number of loaves. You remember the boy who used to sing for bread, the one with the tin whistle. Now he digs through animal droppings, searching for undigested seeds. His lips are cracked white. His eyes, not angry, just quiet. Someone mentions a rumor. In Kharkiv, a girl boiled her own hair and drank the water. Another. A man drank melted snow with crushed bricks, believing minerals might trick the stomach into silence. They weren't wrong. Hunger isn't emptiness. It's movement, the body eating itself in order. Fat, then muscle, then thought. And still, ideology marches on. Propaganda posters still hang at the village schoolhouse, flapping in the wind. Grain is the blood of the revolution, one reads. The building no longer has doors, but someone still repaints the slogan. A neighbor whispers that someone was arrested for weeping too loudly during ration inspection. Disrupting morale, they said. He was taken in daylight. No one made eye contact. His family was given his coat. Children stop asking questions. That's when you know it's over. Because when even the young no longer speak, not from obedience, but from resignation, the famine is no longer an emergency. It's a system, a logic, a replacement for life itself. And what's worse, some start to believe they deserve it. For hiding grain, for questioning Moscow, for being born Ukrainian. The real starvation, you realize, isn't in the stomach. It's in the soul. That quiet click when the body decides not to get up. When the cold isn't cold anymore. when the idea of food becomes offensive, because remembering flavor is more painful than never knowing it at all. That night, you boil water, not to drink, not to eat, just to watch it move, just to hear something bubble that isn't a scream. And for a moment, one merciful moment, it almost feels like soup. You don't talk about the smell, not the sweet thick one that lingers around certain homes, not the cloying scent that clings to old clothing, or the way it curls under doors like steam. People pretend they don't notice, but they do. Everyone does. That's how you know the line's been crossed. It starts quietly. A rumor. A child who vanished in the night. A family that keeps their door bolted even in daylight. But no one asks questions. Not because they don't care, because they already know the answer. The truth rots faster than flesh. In the spring of 1933, Soviet officers stopped raiding homes, not out of mercy, because there was nothing left to take. So they watched, documented, and waited. According to internal NKVD reports later recovered, cannibalism had been officially acknowledged in over 2,500 cases. The reports used terms like antisocial behavior, as if eating your child was a political opinion. But the reality was worse. In villages like yours, it had become routine. You remember when the whispers became open, when a man stood in the square and said aloud, "Meat is meat." No one stopped him. No one corrected him. Some nodded. That night, a body disappeared from the ditch behind the school. People learned to watch who buried their dead quickly and who didn't. It wasn't out of evil. That word doesn't apply anymore. You've long since passed the boundary where morals live. What's left isn't wickedness. It's geometry, bodies collapsing into themselves, the brain shutting off restraint to preserve heat, and hunger, no longer an urge, but a commanding logic. One family in your village built a small smokehouse from bricks and tin. No one asked what they smoked. When the wind blew right, it smelled like old soup and burnt hair. You try to ignore it. But at night, the hunger changes your dreams. You stop seeing food. You see shapes, limbs, ribs, skin that glistens in your memory like pork fat in a pan. And that's when you know it's already inside you. In one of the diaries discovered after the Soviet collapse, a survivor described the look in people's eyes, not of rage, but of vacancy, like they had become spectators inside their own skulls, watching themselves consider the unthinkable. You've seen that look. In the mirror. Some households wrote lists, not of chores or errands, but of the order in which people would be sacrificed, if it came to that. Oldest first, then youngest. Mothers often placed themselves last. Fathers stopped arguing. There was no screaming, no struggle, just quiet decisions, passed like folded notes across fireless rooms. And still, the state punished them. Official posters warned against acts of degeneracy. Radio broadcasts threatened imprisonment for cannibalism. But aid was only given to villages that had not yet fallen. Those who refused human flesh were labeled heroic. Those who didn't, forgotten. As if dying slower made you nobler. There was a woman you once knew, named Katya. She had red shoes, sang lullabies even when there were no babies left to rock. One morning, she sat outside the community barn and cut open her own palm. Let the blood drip into a bowl of boiling nettles. Said it was the last thing she had to give. No one drank it. But they watched. In Moscow, news of the famine was suppressed. Foreign journalists were escorted through model villages. The grain export numbers never dipped. Stalin denied everything. And the world, distracted by Hitler's rise and America's depression, barely looked east. But east is where the crows kept circling. There's a myth that crows don't eat human flesh, but in your village, they do. They perch on roofs now, not waiting for death, but marking where it's already happened. Guides in feathered robes for the kingdom of bones. The question still echoes in some academic halls. Was Holodomor genocide? A failure of collectivization? An ideological excess? But you don't ask that. You ask what kind of system builds a world where a parent has to choose between dying with their child or surviving by devouring them. You ask why that choice was ever real. And worse, why it became so normal, so quiet, that no one screamed anymore. Except the crows. You thought you'd made it. That surviving the first week meant something. That the worst had passed. But Holodomor isn't a storm you wait out. It's a tide that rises, slow, steady, and absolute. By the fourth week, there's no more hunger. That part's done. What comes next isn't starvation. It's decay. Not of the body, of the self. Your legs no longer obey without negotiation. Standing up takes all morning. Walking is strategy. You learn to crawl between shadows because standing makes you a target, and you can't afford to be seen with strength. Those who look strong are accused of hiding food. The Soviets call them kulaks in disguise. Some are beaten, others vanish. One man was found with a bruised apple in his coat. He never returned from the camp they sent him to. Your mind starts unraveling by day 17. Thoughts loop. Words jumble. You forget the names of people you buried. And then, you forget why you buried them at all. Sleep isn't relief anymore. It's risk. There are reports, true ones, of people murdered in their sleep for the last scrap of bread sewn into their coat lining. So, you keep one eye open. But eventually, that too fades. Sleep takes you like a fog, and when you wake up, the world feels several days ahead of you. Someone has taken your shoes. No one admits it. But you don't ask. You understand. The frozen earth burns worse than fire now. Every step splits your heels open like overripe fruit. But shoes are a luxury. Skin is negotiable. Even breathing becomes deliberate. You learn to ration air like water because every breath invites a coughing fit that could draw attention. And being noticed is a death sentence. You cough quietly now, like shame, like prayer. You remember hearing about Block 12, the house where people went to die deliberately, not suicide, just stopping. A room where no one spoke, no one moved, where the final hunger settled like dust. You didn't believe it was real. Now, you wonder if you'll end up there yourself. At day 24, your hearing sharpens, not in clarity, in paranoia. Every creak, every crow, every footstep sounds like a verdict. You start hiding under furniture for no reason, even when alone, especially when alone. You lose weight, yes. But you lose more than that. You lose your noise. There are no more songs, no more laughter. Even crying has vanished. Emotions take energy, and energy is a currency you can't afford. The only thing left in the village that still speaks is the wind. It tells you everything. That death is bored, that your body is no longer resisting. It's rehearsing. By day 28, something inside your mouth cracks. It's not a tooth. It's resolve. Your reflection, if you could find a mirror, would show someone you don't recognize. Hollow, bent, genderless, skin like wax, eyes like glass. You stopped being a person 3 days ago. Now, you're something else, something smaller. You try to remember what bread tastes like, not to imagine it, to remember. But the memory is gone, erased. That's when it hits you. Not even your hunger is yours anymore. It belongs to the machine now. The same machine that declared grain is state property. That sealed Ukraine's borders in January 1933. That published fake harvest numbers to justify mass confiscation. The machine that outlawed mercy, not with bullets, but with paperwork. Historians still debate. Was it mismanagement? Was it a planned extermination? But you don't care about academic labels. You only care about this. Why, in a world so full of people, did no one come? The West was warned. A few journalists even whispered the truth. Gareth Jones, in particular, risked everything to report the famine. But his stories were buried under politics and Soviet lies. Walter Duranty, the Pulitzer-winning correspondent in Moscow, insisted it was exaggerated. He called it mostly bunk. And so you stayed invisible, not because you weren't loud, but because your hunger made no sound they wanted to hear. On day 30, you forget your own name, and then you forget you ever had one, because by then, you're not a person anymore. Your data not recorded, a statistic not approved, a body in a ditch the state swore didn't exist. And in that final moment, cold, faceless, quiet, even death forgets you were ever alive.